Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. I thought that was a good verse for our time. Good reminder of what Christians are supposed to be, as opposed to what they're often tempted to be. If the peacemakers are to be called sons of God, what are the warmongers to be called? What are the people that are constantly selling us strife? Constantly, propagandizing us to hate, the poor farmers in some country on the other side of the world. Because our leaders have some sort of beef or some conflict with the leaders of that country, or vice versa. So this verse is in Matthew 5, and this is the chapter where Jesus gives his Sermon on the Mount. So, at the beginning of the chapter, Jesus goes up to a mountain, and he sits down, and his disciples come, and he gives his disciples commandments, and then his disciples go out and spread it to these crowds. And this sermon runs for 3 chapters, 5 through chapter 7. And this Sermon on the Mount and the scene that's being played out here is essentially the scene that's been playing out for the last 2,000 years. If we flip over to the end of the book of Matthew, chapter 28, after Jesus' death and resurrection, and after, or just before he ascends. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." Disciple is just another term for student. So go make students of me, of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age. Teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Well, one of the things that he taught was, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. But Jesus just wasn't making stuff up as he went along. Much of what he taught had already been alluded to in the prophets of the past. So we'll go to Isaiah. One of my favorite chapters in Isaiah is Isaiah chapter 2. So this chapter starts out, "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains." So going back to the Sermon on the Mount. Seeing the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. Or for that matter, we could go to Matthew 17, the mountain of Transfiguration. So, in this story, Jesus takes 3 of his disciples up to a high mountain by themselves, and he is transfigured before them. And his face shines like the sun, and his clothes become white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appear talking to him. And while Peter gets ahead of himself and starts making all these plans, he was still speaking when a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Again, that's the Mount of Transfiguration. Do you think that's at all related to the mountain in Isaiah 2? "And it shall be lifted up above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths." Back to Matthew 5. "Seeing the crowds, he went up to the mountain and sat down, and his disciples came to him." And then he goes on to give this sermon. And Jesus didn't just teach things, he gave us an example. So if we go to Matthew 26, this is where Jesus is betrayed and arrested. So the chief priests and the elders of the people didn't care for Jesus very much. They saw the crowds that were following him. They saw that his message was resonating with the ordinary people. And they saw the signs and miracles that he was performing. And they saw that as a threat to their status and position in society. Jesus he warned people of their sins, and he didn't spare the chief priests and elders, the scribes and the Pharisees either. He was more than willing to speak truth to the powerful people in society, and they didn't like that very much, especially since, he was resonating with the people, and they saw that as a threat. So, the chief priests and elders, along with Judas, the disciple that betrayed him, came up with this plot, and they go out, and Judas identifies Jesus, and then they have him arrested. And as they're arresting him, one of Jesus' disciples, and in other Gospels, they identify that disciple as Simon Peter. This disciple draws his sword and strikes the servant of the high priest to cut off his ear. So Peter's resisting. He's trying to stop these men from arresting Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take the sword will perish by the sword." And Jesus goes on to say, basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he could resist this if he wanted to. If he wanted to pray for an army of angels to put an end to this, he could do that, but that wasn't his purpose. He didn't come here to establish his kingdom through violence. He came to fulfill the scriptures. So going back to Isaiah 2, up on that mountain of the Lord. Verse 4, "He shall judge between the nations and decide disputes for many people. Then they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not rise up against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come let us walk in the light of the Lord." So imagine that world. Imagine a world where instead of putting trillions of dollars into making weapons of war, making stuff that's basically designed to blow up other people's stuff. Imagine if all that energy was put into productive use, so they beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. They don't waste all this time and energy striving against other nations. Then Jesus said to them, "Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take the sword will perish by the sword." But while people are hyper-focused on, this war on the other side of the world, that it seems as though our side started, the Israelis started bombing the Iranians, and we decided to join the Israelis and start bombing the Iranians too, and this led to an escalation. And in the defense of the Iranians, they were actually more than rational during this conflict. They only escalated things when we escalated things. And we keep escalating things, so it's only going to get worse. Our side, I shouldn't say we. I'm not making the decisions. The rulers are making those decisions on our behalf and in our name. I'm not ashamed to say I don't support this war. I don't support our president anymore. I voted for him, but I voted for him because he explicitly said he wasn't going to get us into any more wars. So not only does he do a total 180, but then he doesn't even bother to articulate why. It's just, we're doing this. Like if you ran for the last decade on not starting any more wars, and you were critical of wars in the past, like Trump was very critical of the Iraq war. Okay, and then you get into power, and it's your turn to lead, and you decide to start another war that very easily could turn into World War III. Well, I think you owe your followers a really, really good explanation. Not just a bunch of stupid tweets that often are incoherent. You need to at least try to sell that policy. Not just attack the people that are calling out his hypocrisy. Here you campaigned on no new wars, and you're essentially getting us into a war of choice. And you're following the same people that got us into the last war that he criticized. Now Trump is telling his followers to watch Mark Levin. Why would I watch Mark Levin? The screeching ghoul that never met a war in the Middle East he didn't want us to get involved in. Guy who thought we should get into the last Iraq war, that guy has any credibility on the subject, or for that matter, Benjamin Netanyahu, guy that's been advocating for war for the last 3 or 4 decades, the guy that helped lie us into the Iraq war. We're gonna follow that guy. Trump's gonna listen to that guy. This doesn't even make sense to me. So I guess all in all, I think this war is a terrible idea. I think it doesn't have anything to do with biblical prophecy or the end times. It's just stupid, selfish, greedy people in power doing stupid, destructive things. And if to the extent that they try to hide behind God, make this into some sort of religious endeavor, they don't know the God that they serve very well. Because that God taught, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God."